Hello, everyone. Wanted to come to you guys and try to put together the big picture off of recent developments to the public, I would say, regarding Göbekli Tepe, but moreover, the larger Tas Tepeler region, which slowly is being accepted as the Tas Tepeler civilization. Now, I wrote an article earlier in the year, a couple, where I put forth that this region was a civilization long before anyone was putting the entirety of the region together. Most people are fixated on Göbekli Tepe and to a lesser degree Karahan Tepe. But those are just two sites in a 200-kilometer region that has up to 12 T-pillar sites, among other sites. But this specifically is a jump off point with Irvin Finkel going on the Lex Friedman podcast to talk about an artifact. And I'm going to play the video here and we can just see what he had to say about it.
You know about Göbekli Tepe?
Yes, of
Well,
course.
everybody knows about the buildings and the architecture and the sculpture. Everybody knows about it. If you go all the way through the photographs, which the archaeologists unwisely put online, you will find in the middle of one colour plate with lots of other things, a round green stone like a scarab from Egypt. That's to say, it has an arched back and a flat bottom. And on the flat bottom, there are hieroglyphic signs carved in the stone. Right? No one said anything about it at all. But it's clear to me, A, that this was a stamp to ratify where the carvings of the signs on clay or some other sealing material would leave an impression. It must be that. So this is about 9,000 BC.
Yeah.
Now, when I was a boy at university, my professor said to me that the reason writing evolved in Mesopotamia because they had complex cities with ziggurats and big buildings and lots of people, and they had to organize everything, and so they invented writing to cope with it. Well, if they had to cope with that in Sumer in 3000 BC, they sure as hell had to do it at Göbekli Tepe because they've hardly even begun to finish excavating the sites of Göbekli Tepe. They go on like Manchester and Newcastle United. And really, the old rule would be you could not have architecture like that without that planned and built according to principle with all the different people. You couldn't have that without writing in southern Iraq. So how come suddenly, 7,000 years earlier, they do it there? And that green stone shows that they had writing. That was an effect.
Okay, so more specifically, he's talking about this object indicating a proto-cuneiform or pictographic writing and maybe even phonetic, you could say. Now, this is widely accepted in Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE as the beginning of that type of writing, the beginning writing itself, proto-cuneiform in the form of pictographic writing, such as this, which then developed into phonetic writing, which then developed into cuneiform, and so on. Now we're saying 6,000 years earlier at Göbekli Tepe, they had this pictographic writing. Now, there's lots of other things to unpack in there as far as what he's saying. He's saying in Sumer, with the ziggurats that were built, it was presumed that you could not have such complex architecture without organization, without sophisticated organization. And with sophisticated organization, they needed, by necessity, to develop a writing system. And here we have it at Göbekli Tepe. So this is just one piece of the puzzle. As I commented in here below, now we know that they had multiple T-pillar sites, up to 12, metallurgy, grain processing, and now writing. So I initially wrote this back in March of this year. Göbekli Tepe and Novelli Kori, cornerstones of a lost civilization, to highlight the fact that Göbekli Tepe does not stand alone. One of the key findings that was long to come out, but was known to the researchers, was that they had dwellings at Göbekli Tepe. I don't want to relitigate the whole narrative and all that, but we all know initially that Göbekli Tepe was considered a temple made by hunter gatherers. That term is loaded. People are still discussing it, it still gets brought up. But we all kind of understand what it means. It doesn't mean civilization, right? It doesn't mean sophistication. And one of the earlier points that was made was that it was only a building for some type of worship and there was no residence around. But that was not true. Here we can see residences were excavated all surrounding many of the enclosures. So we have residential buildings on site surrounding the many enclosures at Göbekli Tepe. That mirrored Novaly Kori, which is now submerged. It was along the shores, if you will, of the Euphrates. It was excavated in the 80s and early 90s and is now submerged because of the Aturic Dam that was built and completely flooded it underwater. I'll get into more of that later. The other point of emphasis I wanted to make is that there are multiple, as I said, up to 12 T pillar sites in the region. We talked about Karahan Tepe, Harbertsvan Tepesi, Kurt Tepesi, Sefer Tepe. These are all T pillar sites. There is a map here of all the T pillar sites in the area, not to mention other sites that didn't contain T pillars. But when you start to step back and look at this in the big picture, this was a massive area. Now, the dates range about from a 3,000 year period. Novelli Coria is 8,400 to 8,000 BC at the oldest. Now, we always talk about the oldest dates. I think, I believe my understanding is that initially archaeologists and researchers said that these were like pop ups. One would pop up here, one would pop up there, another one, and so on, that they weren't connected. I personally challenge that belief. Now, I don't know if they've changed their consensus. It's difficult to follow um, a lot of what they do because it's insular. It's amongst themselves and their peers and discussed in papers that they read. But for the general public, this is what I believe that they still think. Although, as I said, about a month ago, I did see them talking about the Tas Tepeler civilization. And I don't know if they're coming around to it, but the fact is that I put this forward in March, that this is an entire civilization. Now, a lot of people will argue with me what civilization means. And in the article, I link, that civilization is generally tied with the rise of agriculture. I'm going to concede that there's no agriculture here in these sites, but we do have proof of grain processing. They have found grinding stones, grinding tools, evidence that they were processing wild wheat and barley to produce grain. So they were producing food off of wild plants. And they had dwellings, they had massive pillar constructions, and it spanned a large region. One of the other keys And a follow-up article I wrote in April was the discovery of metallurgy. So at Gray Phila and Norsan Tepe, which is a different site that doesn't have T pillars, they found evidence of metallurgy. So now we have metallurgy up to 9,000 BCE approximately. Here's the copper smelting at Gray Philly, 9,000 years ago. So 7,000 BC. This is all the fingerprints, in my opinion, of a sophisticated civilization. You're producing alloys. You have coordinated construction to build massive megalithic sites. You have dwellings. So these are the dwellings that they pieced together at Novelle Core. Um, there is a documentary on YouTube. I'm going to play it real quick of the excavation before it was
Unter
submerged.
bronzezeitlichen Kulturschichten kam eine Siedlung mit Grundmauern massiver Gebäude zum Vorschein. Sie ließ sich dem akeramischen Neolithikum zuordnen, der frühesten Phase der Jungsteinzeit, rund 10.000 Jahre alt. Von zentraler Bedeutung war die Untersuchung dieses Bauwerks. Seine Größe und Ausstattung ließen vermuten, dass es sich um einen steinzeitlichen Kultbau handelte, den ältesten, den man je gefunden hat. Diese Grabung versprach also nicht nur Erkenntnis darüber, wie eine solche frühe Siedlungsform aufgebaut war, wovon und wie man hier gelebt hat, sondern auch Aufschlüsse über bisher unbekannte kultische Vorstellungen und Rituale.
You can see the same T-pillar and wall construction here at Novelle Core.
Die Siedlung, links der Kultbereich, hat eine Ausdehnung von 90 Metern Länge und 40 Metern Breite. Sie lag ursprünglich am Kantarabach, der sich heute 10 Meter tief eingegraben hat. Damals floss er noch auf der Höhe der Siedlung.
So they did CAD drawings way back in the day in the 80s and 90s. I think it was done like on AutoCAD or something. Let me see if I can rub over to that. Here we go.
Links wieder der Kultbau. Schicht 2 kommt hellblau hinzu. Schicht 4, gelb, zeigen die größte Ausdehnung der Siedlung. Auffallend ist, dass die Häuser zumeist auf den gleichen Stellen mit gleicher
So take a look at this here. These are all enclosures, dwellings, communal houses. This is human organization. This is human organization at a pretty large scale. And when you take a look at the entire region and all these different sites, how can you not presume that this was a cohesive system of the same people? So, in my view, this is the quote unquote lost civilization that we have been looking for, and slowly but surely it's going to be accepted. Piece by piece, more and more information is coming out that I think is going to be undeniable, and it's going to revise what we now call a civilization. And people can argue that as much as they want. And I'm not into the semantic argument of what classifies civilization or not. And people will anyways, but I'm going to say that this, me, in my opinion, qualifies as a civilization. Yes, they didn't produce crops. That came later. So if this upends the idea of civilization, so be it. But you have cohesive megalithic building, you have metallurgy, you have grain processing, you have writing, you have a large area of similar architecture. I don't see how you cannot call it civilization. And when we take a look at what Finkel is saying here, this is what he's saying.
Came here because they had complex cities with ziggurats and big buildings and lots of people, and they had to organize everything, and so they invented writing to cope with it. Well, if they had to cope with that in Sumer in 3000 BC, they sure as hell had to do it at Göbekli Tepe, because they've hardly even begun to finish excavating the sites of Göbekli Tepe. They go on like Manchester and Newcastle united. And really,
So now I did get a reply by Jens. Here, let me bookmarks. So Jens Nautroff, which was a civil conversation, and I really thank Jens for that. Um, I want to have civil conversations with the professionals in the field. I don't want to have an antagonistic one, like some of the ones that I've had in the past. And I hope some of his colleagues don't come in and poison his mind about me, because um, I value having these types of conversations, and I respect the way that he responded to that video. Basically, he didn't allude. He pointed to the fact that there's a 14-year-old paper by Sarah Cleat, who, forgive my pronunciation there, Light or Cleat, where she talked about this object. Now, in true academic fashion, lack of a better term, um, it's a little bit non-committal. Um, He writes, it should be emphasized that there is no evidence that the pallets were used as seals, that is, to impress a design on plaster or clay. Nevertheless, the similarity in both concept and motifs to later stamp seals suggests that the stamp seal tradition may have developed not only from earlier uncarved pendants, has been suggested. So at the same time, while Jen's saying this was known, this and it was published, this is very non-committal, in great difference to what Finkel was saying. Um, so, there is a lot of, people want to be right, and I understand that. I want to be right. He questioned my phrasing, but then later said he wasn't pointed directly at me, and then, because of my past interactions, I wanted to clarify what I meant by my phrasing, because in my phrasing, I wrote blows the lid off conventional interpretations. We had a little bit of a conversation about that. That's basically what our back and forth was. At the end of the day, we still had a civil conversation, and I respect him for that, and I would like that to continue. At the same time, um, he has a little bit of issue with what Finkel's saying. He points to the paper. I have a little bit of issue with what the paper's saying. The truth, I think, needs to come out, um, because it's there. I think we're all arguing with our own egos a little bit, and that's unfortunate, but that's human nature. Um, Generally, though, I'm leaning towards more of what Finkel's interpretation is, being more committal. Now, who is Finkel? He is an English Assyrianologist and assistant keeper of ancient Mesopotamian script, and he works for a museum in the UK. Um, he's most famous for bringing the interpretation of a um, clay tablet that um, illustrates where the ark may be. Um, so I would say he's a little bit more out of the box in that regard to have that type of take on something. And um, I'm obviously alternative, so I'm outside the box as well. But long story short, this region is, in my view, a entire civilization. And I may or may not update or might write a new article based upon this stamp. But if you go to ancienthistoryx.com, you can read Göbekli Tepe and Novelli Kori, cornerstones of a lost civilization, and megaliths and metallurgy, a lost civilization takes shape, where I further emphasize the broader picture of this region. Now, be sure to look at these hyperlinks. Some of them are just go to Wikipedia and don't get shouted at me for that, but other ones do take you to important papers and things, like the one that um, on Novelli Kori, and like this article on the smelting at Great Phila. So you can get a lot of information from the hyperlinks. And that's why they're there. So I don't have to write a novel when I'm writing an article. So I mentioned the point and then I give a hyperlink to it so you can get more background information on it. We'll also say that this item has been around in the alternative circles for a while now, and I've seen it. But when you have someone of the status of Finkel making a statement as profound, in my opinion, as he has done with his knowledge and weight behind it, that changes the game. And my alternative research, I always like to base upon a known to some level with the people in archaeology, historians, and researchers who are credited with their experience in making a point or a find, and then use my lack of constraints to build a broader consensus. So, um, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and go to the website and read the articles. And you can also find me at Ancient Epoch on X. And the is a X account for the website, Ancient Hist X, where we post our articles. We're trying to build up this account. This is where we post our articles for the website on X. Thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed this video.